We have a schedule for the 2020 baseball season. Major League Baseball has failed its first test, and more players have opted out of playing in 2020. Hello, everyone, and thanks for tuning in to this Tuesday edition of Around the Bases here, streaming on as part of the 110 Sports Network at 110sportsmedia.com/live. And a reminder that these shows, as well as the other two shows on the 110 Sports Network, Touchline Talk and the J-Mole Show, are available in full on demand at 110sportsmedia.com. Also available in podcast form on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, and on our YouTube channel. Just search for 110 Sports. Now, I left you on Thursday saying there would surely be a lot of new developments across baseball in the next 4 to 5 days. And yeah, that was definitely true. A lot has happened in the baseball world in the last 4 to 5 days, a lot to process. So we'll walk through it all together on this Tuesday, step by step. The first couple of shows we've had here on Around the Bases have started with about 5 to 10 minutes worth of headlines. We've talked about the big storylines, and then we've maybe picked another big topic involving the restart, and then we've dived into some more fun topics, some more regular preseason topics of discussion, albeit with a twist given the situation. So last week we talked about some players and some teams that could benefit from the shortened season. Today, there's just so much news to discuss that it doesn't even seem to be the kind of thing we can just do in 5 to 10 minutes and then move on. So we're going to go through everything today. That's all the big storylines across baseball, and this is how we're going to go through things today. We're going to start by talking about how Major League Baseball has really struggled out of the gate with testing, some real problems over the weekend, over the holiday weekend, and it's led to increased player and executive frustration across the league. It's been a bad look. It could lead to significant problems down the line. Baseball has promised to have a smoother process moving forward. We'll talk about that here in just a moment. Then we'll dive into the latest on the restart efforts. In particular, how are things going at training camps across the league? What additional players have opted out of the season, because we do have a number more than we did on Thursday. Also, what players have been placed on the COVID-19 IL, either because they've been confirmed to having COVID-19, or just they're on the IL and we don't know exactly what the reason is. One way or another, they're on the IL right now. We'll also talk about some players who have not reported to training camp, and the teams haven't been able to have not given statements on why, due to privacy. We'll talk about that as well, and the impact that some of that could have. Then we'll talk about the schedule release that happened last night as Major League Baseball announced its 2020 60-game schedule on MLB Network last night. After that, we'll dive into some of the other major headlines, because yes, there are some headlines that did not make the cut. For those three things, we'll dive into those a little bit. And then we'll wrap things up by talking about the challenges that come with talking about baseball in 2020 to wrap things up. So some thoughts on that, a little bit confusing. You'll understand when we get there. So let's go ahead and dive right into our first major topic of the day. Obviously, a major part of the health and safety plan for the shortened season is testing, and more testing of players, coaches, and essential personnel for games. Players, coaches, and those team personnel underwent intake testing as they began arriving for training camps last week. There's going to be daily temperature checks, and covered individuals will receive COVID-19 testing every other day. That was the plan that was agreed to between the health and safety guidelines that were agreed to with the league and the Players Association. A lab in Salt Lake City, Utah was to be the league's testing facility, and a turnaround on all tests was expected in 24 to 48 hours. Now, for positive tests, specific player details are being kept confidential unless the player either announces it themselves or gives the team permission to announce that they tested positive on their own. That gives them permission or announces it on their own. Those are the two options. And that has happened a lot in recent days. There are a number of players who are on the COVID-19 IL We don't know specifically what the reason for that is. And there are a lot of players that we know who are on the COVID-19 IL, and we do know that they tested positive. Many are asymptomatic, according to reports. Some are not. And we'll get into that a little bit later. Now, on Friday, Major League Baseball and the Players Association released the first set of results as part of that intake screening process. They announced that there were 3,185 tests that had been administered. 38 came back positive. That was a rate of 1.2%. 31 of those 38 were players, and 7 were staff members. 19 teams had at least one positive test. Now, obviously, any person testing positive is a bad thing. We don't want anyone to test positive in an ideal situation. But when people looked at that data and that release of data holistically, the initial reaction was that of being somewhat encouraged. The Athletic's Britt Grioli tweeted, quote, "A literal dream scenario for the league, way lower than many feared/expected." ESPN's Jeff Passan tweeted, quote, "This is quite promising." That 1.2% was lower than a lot of people thought it may be. Other groups, other teams, and other leagues have tested around 5%. So 1.2% seemed good. Now you can look at it and say that's more than 1 out of every 100 people testing positive. That's not great. It's certainly not great. I mean, obviously we know that it's not ideal. But holistically, people thought that that was pretty promising. But then over the next couple days, over the holiday weekend, we began to learn about all the various ways that MLB's system, its testing process, was breaking down from the very start. There was a major caveat with those results. They were only preliminary. Now, more than 80% of the testing was complete at that point, but not all, and several teams had either incomplete or pending results at the time. And the short version of what we've learned over the last couple of days is that while some teams have been able to do inter-squad games, some teams have been out there scrimmaging and holding regular workouts as planned, several other teams have been forced to change or postpone workouts altogether due to incomplete intake testing, and the personal protection equipment, the PPE that was promised to players in many cases as of yesterday, had not yet arrived. The Nationals, Astros, Cardinals were among the teams that canceled workouts scheduled for yesterday due to testing delays. The Oakland Athletics have had major testing delays and were finally able to schedule a workout last night. The Angels ended up administering their own COVID-19 tests on Sunday after the testers failed to show up. The Diamondbacks had issues, and these were just some of the teams that were impacted. Meanwhile, other teams, the Yankees just being one example, held inter-squad games yesterday. They did not have those problems. And to be very clear, this is not a team situation. This is not that somehow the Yankees are getting preferential treatment or that the Yankees are handling things better than other teams. This is the league and its testing system failing. Even just this morning, Cubs manager David Ross announced that the team has pushed back today's workout because they're still awaiting the results of COVID-19 tests. It's taking a lot longer. These are, in many cases, tests administered Friday, administered Wednesday, administered before of last week, and the data is still not back. And remember, they've been promised, the plan was that there would be results back in 24 to 48 hours because everyone would be tested every other day, and you want to know the results of the last test before you take the next test. Now, I could go on with specific details of certain team situations, but I think one important way to look at this is to gauge through player and team reaction how players have been reacting to this. Washington Nationals closer Sean Doolittle said 2 days ago on July 5th, quote, "This has to get fixed. There are a lot of players right now that are trying to make decisions that might be participating in camp that aren't 100% comfortable with where things are at right now. That's where I am. That was Sean Doolittle on Sunday. And this is a time when players are showing up to spring training camps, and we'll talk about this in a minute. Many are expressing that they're not fully committed to playing in 2020 yet. They're going to see how things go. So we'll talk about that, but this is playing out in that environment. Washington Nationals general manager Mike Rizzo yesterday saying, quote, "Without accurate and timely testing, it is simply not safe for us to continue with summer camp. Major League Baseball needs to work quickly to resolve issues with their process and their lab. Otherwise, summer camp and the 2020 season are at risk." And apparently, Commissioner Rob Manfred was not pleased with Rizzo's comments. As a source told the Washington Post, it was reported last night that Commissioner, quote, jumped on him for that. So leave it to Rob Manfred to keep his eye on the ball on that one. Come on. Really? Baseball failed. Its system failed, plain and simple. The ramifications of that are significant. A GM expressed frustration, said we need to get this figured out. Fix the failure. Don't come after the guy who's pointing out the problem. It is not Mike Rizzo's job or anybody else's job to be quiet about something this important failing. And Manfred's coming after Rizzo for saying that out loud, what everyone has been saying across the game, as far as what everyone's been saying in the media and fans across the game, that this is a failure, that this started out as a failure in testing. Oakland Athletics relief pitcher Jake Diekman said yesterday, quote, "We knew there would be hiccups, but we didn't know there would be hiccups with the actual test results because that's basically the number one priority. Everything else is secondary," end quote. And Chris Bryant, Cubs third baseman, talking to the media yesterday, said he did not want to be insensitive to people across the country who had not gotten tested, who wanted to, or who had not gotten quick results. But here's part of what he said. He said, quote, "What we agreed to was testing every day. We've had guys here who showed up on Sunday and haven't been tested again 7 to 8 days later. And then you don't get results for 2 days." He said to the media, "I wanted to play this year because I felt that I would be safe and I would be comfortable. Honestly, I don't really feel that way." That's Cubs third baseman Chris Bryant. Another GM who expressed frustration of what's going on, what happened over the weekend, was Oakland Athletics general manager David Forst, who told A's players in a statement that was obtained, he apparently told A's players in a message, in part, quote, "On top of screwing up the logistics of this whole thing, neither MLB nor CDT, which is the company that collects the samples, communicated any of this to us until we pressed them for information, at which point all they could do was apologize, which frankly doesn't really do much for us." He also said in that statement, quote, "At this point, the blame lies with CDT and MLB, and I won't cover for them like I did earlier today." And those are the quotes that I pulled as being significant. I could have kept going for hours finding quotes from players, from managers, from general managers expressing frustration with how this testing process started over the weekend. Now, there were also some managers and some players who did express that they were disappointed with how things had started, but they were confident that the system would be worked out. So some took different tones. It was not that every single player and every single manager spoke exactly like these players and general managers that I just highlighted. But certainly across the game and across the teams that were impacted most by this, there was real frustration about what happened. MLB put out a statement yesterday saying that most of the testing and the deliveries of the tests to the lab went just fine. But, quote, Unfortunately, several situations included unforeseen delays. We have addressed the delays caused by the holiday weekend and do not expect a recurrence. So, a couple things about that. First off, according to Joel Sherman of the New York Post, the problems largely centered around problems with FedEx over the holiday weekend, which caused the league to then need to go to a backup courier, which then led to a whole other host of problems due to travel and flights. The league called this unforeseen delays. Not unforeseeable delays, like it was impossible to foresee, but unforeseen. The 4th of July was not exactly a surprise. It was very foreseeable. It was entirely foreseeable. MLB knew this was coming, and if there needed to be extra planning for this process, that's fine, but that was not done properly, and there was not proper communication with players and teams. The league was not properly prepared and did not comply with the agreement it had with the players at the very beginning. It's, in many respects, just that simple. There's a couple other things as well. One is that this sort of thing would have a much bigger tangible impact if it happens again. Games would have to be canceled if this happens in the regular season. Now, to be very clear, let's keep this in perspective. Games being canceled is not the end of the world. I mean, we're talking about sports. To be very clear, this is all not life and death in terms of whether games are canceled or not. But it's much more complicated in the grand scheme of things if we're talking about games canceled than teams missing workouts or not being able to start like they wanted to. But perhaps, and in fact the biggest thing here really is player trust in the system. Bryant's quote again, "I wanted to play this year because I felt that it would be safe and I would be comfortable. Honestly, I don't feel that way." There are several players who have echoed a similar sentiment over the last few days. We've seen a number of players opt out. We've seen a number of players test positive. We've seen some with apparently pretty significant symptoms. And several players that are clearly not comfortable with the current situation. Coming into camp, there were players who weren't fully comfortable, and that's, of course, highly understandable, as it is very understandable for any player who chooses to opt out. But what's happened over the first weekend of training camp is only making that worse. If baseball cannot get this right, then there should not be baseball in 2020. Now, the league is, again, is promised a smooth process moving forward, and implied this was pretty much all about the holiday weekend. But it's July 7th now, and the Cubs have not gotten test results, so they're pushing back a training at Wrigley Field. It also seems that as the league is saying that this is pretty much all about the holiday weekend, it won't happen again, they're simultaneously believing that the lab that they set up may not be enough. The Athletics' Ken Rosenthal reported last evening that he said, quote, "A memo the Players Association sent to player agents today says the union and Major League Baseball are actively pursuing an additional medical lab site to increase the speed and efficiency of test processing and reporting. And as cases of COVID-19 continue to rise across the country, and some areas across the country are running out of beds in ICUs, there definitely could be, and there definitely likely will be, questions about how baseball is able to find, if baseball is able to ethically find a new secondary lab in this situation. We'll see how that plays out. What we know is that this needs to be fixed right now, or player trust is going to erode to the point where, regardless of whatever else is happening, there will not be a season. Baseball better be right that they are going to figure this out and that this is not going to happen again. Because this all relies on the players trusting the system. And if enough of them don't, nothing else really matters. we'll have to see how that goes moving forward. So let's shift gears here just a little bit and talk about the latest on the efforts to restart baseball. Obviously, that's a significant problem that's been occurring in the last couple of days. Let's talk about how everything else is going at training camps in recent days. We're obviously talking about a very different look in training camps this year, or this season, this situation. When I signed off on Thursday, we didn't really have a great look into how training camps were being run. We have a little bit more information now. Players wearing masks on the field, at stadiums. Mike Trout running the bases in a mask. His mom tweeting, "If my son can wear a mask running the bases, you can wear yours to the grocery store." Media interviews happening from afar via Zoom. Managers addressing players in groups rather than as a whole team, and a significant number of behind-the-scenes changes. Teams using both teams' locker rooms at their facilities, making significant changes in the layout of clubhouses and things behind the scenes to adjust. We've seen a number of players being placed on the COVID-19 IL in the last couple of days. It's important to note that some of these players have been confirmed as testing positive. Others have been confirmed on the COVID-19 IL, but that does not necessarily mean that they have tested positive. It could mean that they came into contact with someone who tested positive, or perhaps that they have symptoms and haven't received results yet. There are also plenty of players who are essentially unaccounted for at this point, who have not reported to their team's training camps, and the team has not been able to comment on it. So we'll start with players that we know are confirmed to be on the COVID-19 IL at this point. Arizona outfielder Cole Calhoun, Texas outfielder Joey Gallo, both tested positive and at last check at the time of the reporting were asymptomatic. Colorado outfielder Charlie Blackmon was diagnosed last month, and manager Bud Black said yesterday that Blackmon remains at his off-season home. Minnesota Twins third baseman Miguel Sano has tested positive. Tampa Bay Rays outfielder Tommy Pham has tested positive, and when it was reported did not have symptoms. 4 Phillies, including infielder and outfielder Scott Kingery, were placed on the COVID-19 IL. Yankees second baseman DJ LeMahieu tested positive, but was asymptomatic, as was Royals catcher Salvador Perez, and Minnesota Twins catcher and infielder Willens Astudillo. Another big name, Braves first baseman Freddie Freeman, tested positive for COVID-19. His wife posted on Instagram that he was experiencing body aches, headaches, chills, and a high fever since Thursday. We did receive a positive update on there last night, as his wife posted that he is starting to feel better. But the reporting there was that what his wife said in the statement, that Freeman was taking all necessary precautions and is a really healthy guy, and he was apparently experiencing some pretty significant symptoms. These are just some of the players who have been placed on the COVID-19 IL by their teams. There are a lot more. Their health is obviously the most important thing. It's important to note that all these players will need 2 tests negative for COVID-19 before they're able to return to their teams. And the timeline for each of these players potentially returning to their team is very, very, very unclear at this point. Obviously, that's not the most important thing. The health is the most important thing. Their impact on the team is significant. It is secondary, but it is significant. And there's no way to estimate how long it may be before players return. There have been a number of additional players and coaches who've opted out of the 2020 season. Arizona starting pitcher Mike Leake was the first major leaguer to opt out. Then we saw Washington Nationals first baseman Ryan Zimmerman, who has a newborn child, and a mother who is at high risk, opt out of the season, as well as National starting pitcher Joe Ross and his brother, free agent starting pitcher Tyson Ross, Washington catcher Wellington Castillo. Then Colorado outfielder Ian Desmond announced at the end of a powerful post on Instagram that he was opting out of the season. A big one from over the weekend, David Price, former Cy Young Award winner with the Dodgers, opting out of the season, saying it was, quote, in the best interest of my health and my family's health. Another Cy Young Award winner, former Cy Young Award winner, Braves starting pitcher Felix Hernandez. His agent tweeted the news Saturday night that he would be opting out of the season. Fellow Brave outfielder Nick Markakis is opting out of the 2020 season. He said there were multiple factors that led to his decision, including after he talked with Freeman. And per the Associated Press, Markakis said, quote, just hearing him, the way he sounded on the phone, it was rough. It was kind of eye-opening with everything that's going on, not just with baseball, but all over the world. It makes you open your eyes. Several coaches have also opted out of the season or will instruct remotely, like the Mets hitting coach Chili Davis. Cleveland bench coach Brad Mills was among those who opted out of the season. Several other coaches have opted out, but no managers at this point. There's also been a number of players who have not reported to their team's training camps, and the team has not been able to disclose why. There have been no comments from general managers and managers on that. That includes the Dodgers prospect infielder Gavin Lux and pitcher Pedro Baez. Cardinals pitchers Carlos Martinez, Alex Reyes, and Giovanni Gallegos have not reported to training camp at last check, same with Houston outfielder and DH Jordan Alvarez and Dodgers closer Kenley Jansen. The team has not been able to give explanations as to why those players did not report. So that's a lot of names. Obviously, also we have Chicago White Sox infielder Yoan Moncada has not participated in summer workouts with the team yet. Manager Rick Renteria saying, quote, I cannot comment on it. So we are having more and more players who have opted out of the season, who have been placed on the COVID-19 IL, who have not reported to camp, and we don't know exactly why, and that's, of course, understandable. The privacy implications involved and the rules that are being followed as per the collective bargaining agreement about teams being able to announce or not announce if a player has been placed on the COVID-19 IL or their special circumstances. These are all understandable things, but it leads to a great deal of murkiness about the situations for several teams. So several players and managers have shared their thoughts going into spring training before even these testing problems came out. Mike Trout said that he hadn't made a final decision on playing this season with a baby on the way, saying, quote, honestly, I still don't feel that comfortable with the baby coming. He also said, sports are really important for this country right now, but we're risking our families and risking our lives to go out here and play for everyone. My mindset is to play. I want to play. It's just a tough situation. And that's the best player in baseball talking. Giants catcher Buster Posey is not sure about playing in 2020. He said, I think there's still some reservation on my end as well. I want to see how things progress over the next couple of weeks. It would be naive or silly not to gauge what's going on around you. Phillies starter Zach Wheeler is unsure if he'll play in 2020. He's expecting an addition to his family in the coming weeks. He may not play in 2020, or he may pitch until his child is born and then not return, or maybe he will return but miss significant time in the meantime. Brewers outfielder Christian Yelich said he didn't really ever have a thought about opting out. He said, guys are in different boats. If others decided to opt out, I would understand that decision. If someone on our team decided not to play, I would support that decision. And I throw that in there just to give some sort of context. Not every single player who's talking is saying that they're extremely hesitant or had considered not playing. But there have been a lot of players who have said that. So that's a lot of names, a lot of information thrown at you. Some of it you may know, some of it you may not have known. It's probably not all going to be retained because there's a lot to process there. But the fact that there is so much to process is sort of revealing of the situation that we're in right now. I want to end this segment with the words of Nationals closer Sean Doolittle. He got a lot of attention for this quote. He and deservedly so. This is Doolittle, very well spoken reliever for the Nationals right now. He's a major member of the Players Association as a part of their board. And I'm just going to read you what he said because I can't say it any better than he can. This is what he said the other day. Doolittle said, "We're trying to bring baseball back during a pandemic that's killed 130,000 people in the United States. We're we're way worse off as a country than we were in March when we shut this thing down. We haven't done any of the things that other countries have done to bring sports back. Sports are like the reward of a functional society, and we're trying to just bring it back, even though we've taken none of the steps to flatten the curve, whatever you want to say. We just opened back up for Memorial Day. We decided we're done with it." Doolittle also said, quote, "We need help from the general public. If they want to watch baseball, please wear a mask, social distance, keep washing your hands. Like, we can't just have virus fatigue and think, well, it's been 4 months, we're over it. This has been enough time, right? We've waited long enough. Shouldn't sports come back now? No. There are things we have to do in order to bring this stuff back." That was Nationals reliever Sean Doolittle just a day or so ago. And I'll let him have the final word for this segment. We'll take our first break here on Around the Bases. When we come back, we will pivot to the release of the 2020 MLB schedule that was on MLB Network last night. We'll talk about that. We'll also dive into some other major headlines from across the baseball world over the past few days. Stay with us. You're watching Around the Bases from 110 Sports. All right, welcome back to Around the Bases here, streaming on the 110 Sports Network at 110sportsmedia.com/live. I'm Chris Brown, and I know that last segment or two there was a little bit down, a little bit of a not the most fun things to talk about involving baseball, but I think it was a necessary thing to discuss, a necessary sort of reality check of where things stand because there are no guarantees that we even get to a baseball season in 2020. That's still a few weeks away. So it's important to note that things are not going just perfectly fine and acting like we're just about to start the season and everything's great. We need to acknowledge the problems that are occurring, the situation as it is. So that was important to discuss. But we are going to pivot now to a little bit more of a fun topic here. The regular season schedule was announced. The full schedules for the 60-game season were announced on MLB Network last night. A quick breakdown, in case you missed it before. We knew this information before, but here's a quick breakdown of how things line up. Each team plays 40 games against divisional opponents. So that's 10 games against each team in your division across 3 different series. And then with the home and road games of those 10 games splitting into 7-3 or 6-4. So that means the Reds playing the Brewers, there'll be 10 games between those two teams in 3 different series, and it'll either be 7-3 or 6-4 in terms of home and road games. Each team will also play 20 interleague games. All of them are against teams in their region, in the corresponding division of the opposite league. 6 of those games are against each team's natural interleague rival. And what that means is the Mets' natural interleague rival is the Yankees, the Cardinals is the Royals. It's all geographical location. Each team has 6 off days after opening weekend through the end of the regular season on September 27th, as they're playing 60 games in 66 days. Opening night on July 23rd features the Yankees at the Nationals, and that one looks like it's going to be a really exciting matchup between Garrett Cole and Max Scherzer, and the Nationals will be raising their championship banner. That game will be followed by the Dodgers hosting the Giants, both those games airing on ESPN on July 23rd to kick off the season. The rest of the teams begin play the next day on July 24th. Now, obviously, these schedules aren't going to be perfectly fair just in general, and particularly given the circumstances of this season. Some teams are going to have an easier schedule than others. Some teams are going to have to travel less than others. That's just the nature of any season, but particularly a season like this. A couple things to point out, though, that are a little bit interesting. Most of this information is not heavily researched, but it's information from MLB Network's broadcast from last night that I think is interesting. Strength of schedule, we'll start there. Strength of schedule the first 2 weeks of the season could be more important than, and will be more important than ever, as it's going to be critical for teams to get off to a good start this season. So they took a look at the teams with the easiest and hardest strength of schedule across the first 2 weeks of the season through August 6th, based on records from 2019. The easiest strength of schedule over the first 2 weeks of the season would be the Reds, followed by the Cubs, followed by the Cardinals, followed by the Royals. So those are all you'll notice. All Central Division teams, the first 3 in terms of easiest schedule, are all NL Central teams. The hardest strength of schedule the first 2 weeks of the season is the Mets, the Pirates, and the Blue Jays. So you'll notice 2 Eastern teams there, the Mets and the Blue Jays, but in opposite divisions. Then you have the Pirates, who are an NL Central team. So you see 3 NL Central teams with the easiest strength of schedule the first 2 weeks, and then another NL Central team with the second hardest strength of schedule the first 2 weeks. So it'll be interesting to see how the NL Central race plays out the first couple weeks of the season. More important, though, the strength of schedule for the entire season. We actually talked about this last week because we already knew the format. The easiest strength of schedule for the entire season is the Twins, the Indians, and the Cardinals have the easiest strength of schedule for the entire season based on last year's records. The hardest strength of schedule is two really bad teams in the top three in that category. The Marlins have the hardest strength of schedule. The Orioles have the third hardest strength of schedule, and then the Angels have the second hardest strength of schedule for 2020 based on last year's records. In terms of miles traveled in the 2020 season, this isn't particularly impactful in terms of we can't predict anything from it, but it was interesting to see that the teams that will be traveling the most miles in 2020 are the Rangers, Astros, Mariners, and Oakland Athletics, all teams in Western divisions, as they're traveling all the way from Seattle over to Texas, up and down the West Coast. And the least miles traveled in 2020 will be all Central teams: Milwaukee, the Cubs, the Tigers, and the Cardinals. The reason for that isn't too hard to understand. The Central teams, the teams that are located in the AL and NL Central are located in the middle and northern central portions of the country. So there are no Central teams in the South Central portion of the country. But just an interesting comparison, the Rangers, who are going to travel the most miles in 2020, are going to travel almost 15,000. Meanwhile, the Brewers will only travel 4,000, a little under 4,000. 20 is the most days a team can go without an off day by rule in Major League Baseball. 7 teams will have a 20-day stretch without a break in 2020. The Braves, Tigers, Mariners, Rockies, Twins, Blue Jays, and Phillies. Also, some interesting tidbits in terms of scheduling of rivalries. 7 of the 10 games between the Red Sox and the Yankees will be at Yankee Stadium. 7 of the 10 games between the Cardinals and Cubs will be at Wrigley Field. Some people noting that that's just the way that things are going to have to be. It's not going to be perfect. And how much does that matter without fans in the stands anyway? Some, I'd say, as players are going to be more comfortable at their home ballpark, staying at their own homes in their home city. But the advantage that may come from fans, I think, is going to be mitigated significantly. So I'd say there's some advantage for the team that has more games of with their rival at home, but it's the nature of how things are going to be this year, and it's probably not going to be that significant. One other interesting tidbit people pointed out, the Yankees play 20 of their final 23 games against teams that lost 95 or more games last year. So 20 of their final 23 games are against teams that were very bad last year in 2019. So if the Yankees maybe are in a close race in the AL East down the stretch, which is very possible, or maybe they're even a game or two back of maybe the Rays. They could be a really good team this year. Watch out, because the Yankees have a really easy schedule down the stretch. Now, as far as individual games, we're still talking about a 60-game season here, not like a 16-game season like in the NFL. So circling individual games as of critical importance when we don't know how rotations are going to line up, all those things, that's not really a thing. We can't circle the calendar and be like, oh, this game, that's a must-win right now at this point. But a couple of quick games of note. July 23rd, it'll be the Yankees and the Nationals. That's opening night, Cole versus Scherzer. We talked about that is the most likely setup for that one. On opening day, it'll be Colorado at Texas on the 24th. That'll be the debut of Globe Life Field, the Rangers' new stadium. That'll likely be Lance Lynn versus German Marquez. July 29th and 30th, Joe Girardi returns to Yankee Stadium as the Yankees host the Phillies. Girardi, of course, the new manager of the Philadelphia Phillies. August 11th and 12th, it'll be the Cubs and the Indians in a rematch of the 2016 World Series, but it's not the first time the two teams have played since then. Important to note that. August 13th, it'll be the White Sox and the Cardinals in the Field of Dreams game, still scheduled to take place in Iowa. The Cardinals replacing the Yankees in that game as teams only playing teams in the region in 2020. Wouldn't make sense to bring the Yankees to Iowa, so the Cardinals replace the Yankees to take on the White Sox in the Field of Dreams game. Baseball has been working to construct a stadium at the site of where Field of Dreams was filmed. August 21st through 23rd, Madison Bumgarner, now a member of the Arizona Diamondbacks, will return to San Francisco as the Diamondbacks take on the Giants. A couple of other quick notable days. August 16th, baseball will celebrate the 100th anniversary of the Negro Leagues. August 28th, Jackie Robinson Day, which is usually in April, will be celebrated. And September 9th, Roberto Clemente Day across Major League Baseball. So those are just a couple of notes from the schedule. Obviously, there are individual impacts for individual teams. There are going to be teams and situations and fans that say their team got a bad deal in the scheduling, and that's just the reality of the situation. We're not going to dive into individual teams, obviously. Those are just a couple notable things from Major League Baseball schedule release, and fingers crossed we get to the point of playing out that schedule a couple of weeks from now. All right, another segment here for you. A couple other headlines which didn't fit into those three main categories. Typically, we'd start with headlines in a list like this, go through a quick rundown of the big headlines across the sport. Today, there were just a couple of big things that were really important to talk about off the top that were headlines that I figured just needed to go first, that doing other headlines before it would seem like we were ignoring the big things, so we'll start with the big things. That's what we did. Here's a couple other quick headlines, a quick rundown of some other things that have gone on around the game, non-COVID-19 related, non-schedule related, the last couple of days. The All-Star Game has been canceled for the first time since World War II. MLB announced the news, which was not a surprise given the situation, on Friday. The game was slated to be hosted by the Dodgers in Los Angeles. Dodger Stadium has not hosted an All-Star Game since 1980. The team will now host in 2022, as the Braves are scheduled to host the All-Star Game next year. As I mentioned, the last time there was no All-Star Game was World War II, when in 1945 wartime travel restrictions forced it to be canceled. A couple quick injury updates for you. Yankees starting pitcher Masahiro Tanaka is reportedly doing well after suffering a very scary injury during practice on Saturday. He was hit in the head by a line drive off the bat of Giancarlo Stanton, but after testing at the hospital, Tanaka was diagnosed with a mild concussion and returned to Yankee Stadium, reportedly in good spirits the next day. Manager Aaron Boone told reporters yesterday that all signs continue to be encouraging with Tanaka. The hope is he'll still be ready to go for the team at the beginning of the season. Sticking with the Yankees here, Giancarlo Stanton said yesterday that he'll be ready to serve as the team's DH on opening day. He suffered a grade 1 calf strain back in February and would have missed the start of the season in regular circumstances. He played in just 18 games last year due to injury. And fellow Yankees outfielder Aaron Judge told reporters yesterday he expects to be ready to go for opening day. He'd been recovering from a stress fracture in his first right rib. Also, Dodgers starting pitcher Jimmy Nelson is scheduled to undergo back surgery today. He'll miss the entire 2020 year. Once an emerging young starter, Nelson has dealt with a variety of arm issues in recent years. The 30-year-old had signed with the Dodgers on a one-year, $1.25 million contract back in January. Amid the current movement across the country, the Cleveland Indians released a statement Friday night saying the team will review their nickname, which they've had for over the past 100 years. The team in a statement saying, quote, "We are committed to making a positive impact in our community and embrace our responsibility to advocate social justice and equality. Our organization recognizes our team name is among the most visible ways in which we connect with the community." The announcement came just hours after a similar statement from the Washington Redskins, who will be undergoing a, quote, "thorough review" of their name. Both teams have faced pressure from several groups for decades really, over their names. The Redskins' decision came after FedEx, which owns the naming rights to their stadium, along with other corporate partners, called for the change. Indians manager Terry Francona told reporters on a Zoom call Sunday that he supports the idea of a name change. He said, quote, "I've been thinking about it, and I've been thinking about it before we put out that statement. I know in the past, when I've been asked about whether it's our name or the Chief Wahoo, I think I would usually answer and say, I know we're never trying to be disrespectful. And I still feel that way. But I don't feel that's a good enough answer today. I think it's time to move forward." Not long after, star shortstop Francisco Lindor also expressed openness for the potential change. He said, quote, "If changing the name brings more love and peace to society, I'm open to listening to the change of the name. Society is shifting, and we are due for some change. I'm open to listen for a change of the name," end quote. The Atlanta Braves, in a statement, said the team honors, supports, and values the Native American community, but the Braves gave no indication that they were considering a name change of their own. Shifting gears here, former baseball executive Dave Dombrowski, as well as general manager Dave Stewart and former manager Tony La Russa, are part of a group dedicated to bringing Major League Baseball to Nashville. The group is called Music City Baseball LLC, and the team in Nashville would be either an expansion franchise or the relocation of a current Major League team. MLB Network's John Heyman tweeted that according to a Major League source, the league has no immediate plans to expand to Nashville or anywhere else. But should that change or a team decide to move, and there are a number of teams with various stadium situations, Nashville certainly could be an appealing spot. The city is currently home to the AAA Sounds, the Rangers AAA affiliate. Former Major League pitchers R.A. Dickey and Barry Zito, along with Vanderbilt University head baseball coach Tom Corbin, are listed as baseball advisors for the group. Finally, veteran outfielder for the Brewers Ryan Braun, told reporters over the weekend he's now more likely to play next season given the nature of the 2020 season. He said in January he was considering retiring after 2020. He's entering the final year of a 5-year, $105 million contract, and he turns 37 in November. And though he's battled some injuries in recent years and seen extended off time during the season, Braun has remained productive. In 144 games last year, he hit .285 with 22 home runs and 75 RBI. So that's a mouthful there, but a lot of headlines, a lot of things have happened in the last couple days. That's a quick rundown on some other major storylines across the game. So go ahead and take one quick break here, and then we'll come back, wrap up the show with some final thoughts about talking about baseball in 2020. We'll be right back. You're watching Around the Bases from 110 Sports. All right, welcome back to Around the Bases from 110 Sports. I'm Chris Brown. Final thoughts for you today here before we wrap up the show on this Tuesday. I'll tell you the past couple of shows, the first two shows of Around the Bases here last week, I strived for some sort of balance, starting the show with sort of a reality check of where things stand, some of the obstacles of playing baseball in 2020, players who've opted out, etc., etc. And then we've had some segments in the second half that have been more focused on the game itself, the players themselves. Some more typical preseason content, albeit even those were in the context of a shortened season. But that shift from updating you on players who have tested positive for COVID-19 to talking about, what team's going to win the AL East is becoming much harder to make. NBC Sports' Craig Calcaterra tweeted on Sunday. He said, "I really do not know as a sports writer how to effortlessly go from Braves star first baseman is really sick with the virus that has killed 130,000 people in the past few months to 5 keys for the Braves repeating as NL East champions." And to be really clear here, the most important part of this whole situation is the health of everyone. Baseball players, people across the country. I mean, everyone. This is not specific to baseball, to sports. The health of everyone when it comes to this virus is the most important thing. But trying to make that turn from here's a huge list of players who've opted out, who don't feel safe, who are considering opting out, who have tested positive and we don't know when they're going to return, to, analyzing teams in a normal way is not something that can easily be done right now. It's something that I've seen a lot of baseball writers, reporters, media members talking about how it's difficult to try to be sensitive to the situation, and also because the typical analysis of teams that you would have sort of conflicts with trying to be sensitive to the current situation. We were actually going to start our division previews today. And the reality of the situation is that players opting out or not being available due to being on the COVID-19 IL or for whatever reason could drastically impact on the field success for their team in 2020, assuming we have a 2020 season. The fact is the Braves without Freddie Freeman are a vastly different team than the Braves with Freddie Freeman. But not only does it feel weird to try to pivot to, how the Braves are going to do this season, there's also just so much uncertainty. These players that are out now, some will be ready to go tomorrow, or 2 weeks, or maybe it's 4 weeks, or maybe they don't play at all this season. The Cardinals have 3 key pitchers whose statuses are just up in the air. Their closer, one of their top pitchers, top starters, hopefully rejoining the rotation was the idea. Their top pitching prospect. Their statuses are just completely unknown. And that's, of course, as I said, 100% understandable given these circumstances. But how do you pivot, even if you wanted to easily pivot? How do you pivot to evaluating a team when we don't know? The reality is, evaluating a team, we don't know when crucial players may or may not play this season. I'd like to say that by Thursday, some things are going to be clearer, and they probably will. But other things are going to be murkier, I'm sure, in the days to come. We're obviously going to wish for good health for everyone involved. But the reality is that talking about baseball in 2020, if we do get to have a regular season, is going to be different. We're all going to have to figure out how to adjust, how to understand the context of what we're saying, and understand that things are just going to change a lot more than we would like. Obviously, health is number one. And as we get closer, as we still have plenty of time, we still have a few weeks before we would get to the regular season. We have plenty of time to do regular preseason type content, to talk about teams and divisions and X factors and players who could take the next step and players who are overrated and all these things. We'll talk about that in the days to come because we have plenty of time for that. And we'll just see how things play out, and we'll all do our best to embrace the uncertainty, but also work together to do what we can as a country to ensure the health of everyone involved across the world, the country, the sports world, everywhere. And we'll just see how things play out. I'm sure there'll be plenty to talk about on Thursday, plenty of new developments, and we'll just see where things stand. If it seems appropriate, we'll dive into some of those typical regular preseason things. It's probably never going to seem fully appropriate, but we'll just see how things play out over the next couple days and hope for the best and act for the best. So thanks for watching Around the Bases here on the 110 Sports Network. Back with you as always on Thursday at 1 Eastern. Don't forget to check out all the latest written content at 110sportsmedia.com, including our ongoing series looking back at the at the NBA and NFL drafts of the last 10 years, ranking the top 100 college basketball players of the last decade, and the top 10 players in Major League Baseball at each position over the last 10 years. Remember that 110 Sports live coverage continues here on the 110 Sports Network tomorrow with the J Moles Show with Josh Molnix at 11 a.m. Eastern, and on Thursday with Touchline Talk with Josh Doring at 11 Eastern as well, with Around the Bases airing just about an hour after that. So thanks for watching, stay safe, and I'll talk to you on Thursday.